This is both a personal account and a shared one of my uncle, aunt, cousins, and my mom. My uncle, aunt, and cousins used to live in a house in Terre Haute, Indiana, which was dubbed the Red House. This house was my very first experience dealing with the paranormal, and certainly not the last. My uncle and family moved into this house back in the early 1990s. It was a large 2-story shingle-style house, corner lot, that was painted red with a creepy basement. Most of it was unfinished with dirt floors and rock and stone walls, detached garage and secret room, which I'll get to later. Our first visit to my family's new house was for Christmas in 1991. We were going to drive up from Florida and spend the week of Christmas with my family. Before our visit, I remember speaking with my cousin. We'll call him CJ. He was the middle child of 3, one older sister and one younger brother. Before going up there, he would tell me that I was going to see ghosts when I came to visit. I laughed it off and told him he was crazy, as at the time, I 100% did not believe ghosts were real. He would go on to tell me that he often saw numerous ghosts in his house, predominantly upstairs where his room was located. He said that only a few of the ghosts would ever step foot in his room. The others would remain in the hallway and other areas of the house. Again, I laughed at his claims and told him I would believe it only if I see it. When we arrived for Christmas week, I was surprised how large this house was. It was easily the largest house that I ever stayed at, and all I could think about was playing hide-and-seek or manhunt inside the house with my cousins. I was staying with my cousin who told me about the ghost in his room, as he had bunk beds. My parents stayed downstairs in the spare bedroom. As I walked upstairs to my cousin's room, I remember being in awe of how long his hallway was, but there was only 3 doors in that long hallway. The first door on the left was the bathroom. The next door on the right was my girl, we'll call her Nicole, cousin's room, and the final door at the very end of the hallway was CJ's room. His room was massive. It looked like a mini ballroom. As he walked in, straight ahead was his bunk bed and a large window behind the bed. He had his TV and video game system set up to the right and numerous toys and Hot Wheel tracks to the left. There was also a small crawl space door along the left side wall. The first night my cousin kept telling me everything he had seen in his room and throughout the house. It did spook me out, but I was still very skeptical of his story. One thing that I did notice was that CJ had very dark circles under his eyes. He said it was because he couldn't sleep very well in that house and would often stay up most nights trying to sleep. On that first night, I listened to his stories and we went to sleep. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred. That would change the very next day. On my second day at the house, after coming inside from playing outside, CJ and I went upstairs to watch a movie and play with some toys. We set up his Hulk Hogan tent in the middle of the room and pretended it was a stadium as we played with his wrestling figures. We had set up some spy-tech toys around the room, one toy being a motion sensor that you would set at the door, and if it opened, it would beep. We set it up because my cousin Nicole would often barge in whenever or would mess with our toy setup, so that toy would alert us if she entered the room. Shortly after we were playing with the action figures in the tent started shaking lightly. I noticed it at first, but it wasn't too alarming. Not more than a minute later, it started shaking rapidly. I automatically assumed it was Nicole and looked out the door but couldn't see her. By the time I stuck my head back in the tent, the shaking stopped. CJ was frozen still, looking out the unzipped window of the tent at nothing. Seconds later, it started shaking again. I jumped out of the tent and witnessed it shake for a quick second before it stopped. I blamed CJ for somehow doing this and trying to scare me. I then thought it could have been Nicole, but as I opened his bedroom door, the Spytech toy sensor sounded off. That proved no one else other than CJ and myself were in that room. Nicole was lying on her bed watching television. Even though that scared me, I still wasn't convinced that a ghost could have done that. I told my parents about it at dinner, and they kind of laughed it off. My uncle chimed in and said, "Did CJ's imagination get to you as well?" CJ has told his parents about the various experiences he has had in this house, but they didn't entertain the possibility of it being a ghost. They said it was all in his imagination. That night, I slept on the bottom bunk and CJ slept on the top. The events that night will never leave my memory. As I started dozing off, CJ reached around the backside of the bunk and got my attention. He told me to look down the hall. The bunk bed was perfectly positioned where, depending on which side you slept on, you could look right down the long upstairs hallway. Where I was laying, all I had to do was turn my head and I could get that vantage point. As I looked down the hall, I saw a very slender and tall man. He had on a toboggan and a long coat. I could distinctly make out his face, and it appeared to be covered in soot or a dusty powder. He was walking very slowly towards our room, but I could not see anything under his knees, like his legs stopped right at the knee. It paralyzed me in fear. He disappeared before getting to the room, which was a few seconds, even though it felt like an eternity. I was so frightened that I couldn't move. I just turned my head and buried it into my pillow. I recall shaking from fear when a few minutes later I was overcome by an ice-cold sensation coming from the side of my body that faced the door. I slowly turned around and saw a woman, clear as day. She had tattered clothing and was holding a cat. She was literally inches from me. She was also musky, like she had on stale perfume, but it was a very light smell. This may sound cheesy, but she resembled the Fratelli mom from the Goonies. Body type-wise, I didn't see her face. I couldn't even scream for my parents. I again turned around and got deep in under my sheets with a pillow over my head. As soon as I woke up, I ran down the stairs and told my mother. This time my mom didn't shrug it off like before. Instead, she said everything will be fine and some things can't be explained. A few days later was Christmas. After we opened our presents, we went outside to ride bikes and rollerblade. My mom went upstairs to take a shower. She was alone in the house. As she was in the shower, she heard the door open and footsteps getting closer to the shower. She assumed it was my stepdad, but it couldn't have been, as he was outside with us. She spoke out to him, but didn't receive a response. As she pulled back the shower curtain, she noticed the open door and was quickly hit in the face with a cold burst of air. It knocked her back a few steps, but she didn't fall. Her towel and clothes then fell off the bathroom countertop onto the ground. After taking a shower, she walked outside and asked my stepdad if he had entered the bathroom at any time, of which he responded he didn't. She told me this years after this visit, when I was late in my teens. She also told me that the house had creeped her out after our first night there. She felt like she was being watched and also felt a breath on her neck while walking alone down the hallway. We left a few days after Christmas. I felt so terrible that CJ had to continue living in the house and be tormented like he was. It wasn't soon after that activity picked up and my uncle and aunt started having their own experiences, which ultimately led to them selling the house and moving a few blocks away. I would also like to share some of the paranormal events that they encountered. These are the experiences they had and are not in any particular order, simply accounts that I recall them telling me. They had an old German shepherd named Yankee. He had bad hip problems and was an indoor-outdoor dog. He loved staying in their detached garage and would hide in there during storms. One night, something spooked him so bad that he jumped out the small window located in the garage that was almost 6 feet off the ground. Another time, they found him pawing at the back door. They once went on vacation, and when they got back, they found their huge 500-gallon fish tank busted open and all the fish dead. This tank had very thick glass, and there were no signs of anything falling and busting it open. My youngest cousin Joe was at the top of the stairs and Nicole was at the bottom. They were playing with a slinky. All of a sudden, Nicole said it appeared like Joe was pushed from behind as his body slingshot forward and he fell down the stairs, breaking his clavicle. She didn't see anyone push him, just described what it looked like. Before they moved out of the house, they decided to further explore the crawl space in CJ's room. They thought the crawl space didn't lead anywhere, but that was not the case. The crawl space contained bags of rat poison that appeared to be stored in there for a long period of time. After removing all of the bags, they noticed the little room was in fact a crawl space. They crawled in there and wiggled through the tight space for about 8 feet until they found a hidden room at the end of the crawl space. My uncle said my room appeared like a time capsule. It had inches of dust on everything and many cobwebs. The air was stagnant, and there was an old desk, boxes of old worn shoes and newspapers from the 1930s and 40s littered throughout the room. They were surprised that they lived in this house for a few years and never even knew this room existed. Their landlord never mentioned it and was surprised himself when they mentioned they found it. The house was dubbed the Red House because it was painted red. The first year that my family lived in the house, their landlord had hired painters to paint the exterior of the house yellow. Within a few months, the red bled right through the exterior. Supposedly that wasn't the first time someone attempted to paint the house a different color, but after each attempt, the pale red color would return. The final straw, which caused my family to break their lease and move out early, was on the night of CJ's first Little League baseball game of the season. CJ and my uncle were already at the ball fields. My aunt got Nicole and Joe in the car, which was parked in the detached garage that was directly behind the house. The driveway of the garage faced the side street. My uncle went around the house and turned off all the lights in the house except for a lamp in the living room, kitchen light, and the exterior lights. It was already dusk by this time. As they pulled out of the garage driveway and drove around to the front side of the house, my aunt looked up at the house and noticed every single light in the house, every room window, was turned on. It stopped her in her tracks. As she continued to stare at the house, she noticed the curtains in CJ's room open and a dark shadow silhouette of a person in the window. My aunt drove to the ball fields that night and told my uncle that it was time to move. A short time later, they did. Numerous neighbors knew that the house was haunted and would often tell my uncle and aunt. My cousins would also hear it at school, as the local kids all knew about the house's history. One of the neighbors told my uncle that numerous people died in that house, ranging from murders to suicides, and the house had been inhabited throughout its history by some very shady and malevolent people. The same neighbor told my uncle that there were at least 5 spirits in that house, some being evil or demonic. My family never took the time to confirm any of those stories. Once they moved, they wanted nothing else to do with that house. This happened when my daughter was about 1.5 years old. We had her nursery set up before she was born, but for the first year or so she co-slept with us in a crib next to our bed. It had gotten to the point where my husband and I, moving around in bed and his snoring was waking her up, we decided it was time to move her into her own room. Up to the point she's never even napped in there. We always just put her down for a nap in our room in her little crib. Husband goes to work, and since we're transitioning her to her new room, I decided to try napping her in there. So I'm sitting in a cushy chair feeding her before she goes down like I always do, but I get a weird feeling. Just that disturbing feeling that someone is watching you. I chalk it up to the fact that no one really went into that room, and I'm getting used to a different routine. My daughter falls asleep while being fed, and I put her down. I walk out the door and go downstairs and turn on the baby monitor. 10 minutes later, she's up and crying. I figured she just woke up, didn't recognize her surroundings, and started to cry. I went back upstairs and tried to put her back to sleep. It was a no-go. So I brought her downstairs and she fell back to sleep on the couch. I just shrugged it off as a bad nap day. That night, my husband gets home and I tell him what had happened. He said he would try to put her down in there that night. He puts her down that night. 10 minutes later, she's crying. He tries to get her back to sleep for an hour. It just wasn't working. We bring her back into our room. She goes right to sleep in her crib. At this point, I just figured she doesn't like the new surroundings. She likes her old surroundings or whatever. But I feel it's best that she starts sleeping in her own room because we are waking her up at night with our movement. So the next day, nap time rolls around and I try again. Sitting in the cushy chair feeding her, I get that same awful feeling. It was an overwhelming feeling of get out. Again, I figured I was just being paranoid. She fell asleep and I put her in the crib. I go downstairs. 10 minutes later, she cries. Repeat the day before, same thing at nighttime. Same thing with my husband trying to put her down. She sleeps that night in our room. We're now on the 3rd day of trying to put her down in her own room. I go in for nap time, try to put her down. She falls asleep in my arms and I put her in the crib. I feel a shove on my back while putting her down. I panicked, turned around and started to run out of the room, leaving my kid there. Then my brain kicked in before I reached the door and said, "Oh, God, my child." I ran back, grabbed her, and stayed downstairs the rest of the night. She napped on the couch. I told my husband what happened. He figured I was just tired and stumbled, that I didn't really get shoved, blah, blah, blah. Bedtime rolls around and he goes to put her down. I'm listening over the monitor, and I hear her sobbing uncontrollably. Then I hear my husband say, "Shut up, you little monster." I flew out of bed, flung open the door, and there was my husband sitting on the floor with my daughter passed out in a food coma from her bottle, looking at me like, "What?" I got really upset and started crying. I told him, I heard you. I heard what you said. How could you say something like that to her?" Keep in mind, my husband is the softest, kindest person ever. He's never, ever name-called or yelled. He's just not like that. But I swear I heard him. There was no interference from another monitor. Our house is a dead zone. We get no cell reception, and our baby monitor barely worked going from upstairs to downstairs, so I really don't think I was picking up something else. At this point, he's looking at me like I'm crazy, and he's totally confused. He just said, "What are you talking about? She's asleep. I didn't say anything. She's not crying. Oh, she hasn't been crying." Still freaked out and confused, I just had her in our room that night. I was adamant with my husband that there was something in her room, and I refused to put her to bed in there. I stayed downstairs the entire day the next day until my husband got home. I called my sister and told her what was happening. We grew up with severe hauntings in our house, and I knew she would understand. She told me to smudge and gave me a special prayer to say. I waited until my husband got home to do the smudging, prayer, and I also decided to salt the house. We started downstairs. My husband smudged while I salted and said the prayer. We go upstairs and get to the nursery. My husband smudges it, and I'm standing there in the doorway with my daughter. She's standing next to me. I salt the room and say my prayer. As I'm finishing up, my daughter literally follows something with her eyes as it moves out through the door past me. She claps her hands and says, "Bye-bye." I nearly crap a brick. We finish smudging, salting, and saying the prayer. She slept no problem in that room after that, and she still sleeps in there. I have no idea what it was, but I'm glad we got rid of it. I arrived at the luxury mall where I work at one of my 2 jobs. I had about 30 minutes before my shift, so I decided to go to the large mall restroom near my store to do my hair, refresh my makeup, and to use the toilet. The usual. Our mall is located on land leased from a Native American tribe. It exists in a mountain pass in California that has been the location for battles, a stagecoach route, many vehicles passing through on the nearby state highway, and sadly, the dumping site for bodies for many years as well, as legend has it. A nearby county regularly drives buses of homeless to a road about a mile from the mall and dumps them to wander up and down the streets with their belongings. It is a place of travel and desert beauty. It is a pass that seems to experience the harshest weather during any storm. Of course, this odd place has a casino. But the town has suffered from the financial crisis just like any other and run down. There is a lot of good there, a lot of seediness there. The place is saved by the hearts of the people. It doesn't really matter where one sees a spirit, but the public restroom was the setting. I pushed the door open. There were 2 women and a child in the first row of stalls. The child was bouncing all over the place. The women were loud and irritated me. So I went to the row of stalls on the far side of the restroom because they are used less frequently, cleaner. I went to the 4th or 5th stall. The back of my head was tingling, which is usually a sign I'm going to experience something or other. I was in a hurry to pee, so I ignored it. I opened the door of the stall number 4, and there she was. There was a young woman sitting on the toilet, fully dressed. I think she was 18 to 20 years old. She was 2-dimensional, like a paper doll that had been folded at the hips. She was face down over her thighs. Her legs were paper doll flat and folded down to the floor in front of her. She was flat and transparent, 2-dimensional. I could see through her and could see the front of her as well as the back. That is the way she projected herself. A paper doll. In an instant, as it happens sometimes, she communicated that she felt sick. She was nauseous and her head hurt. She was high. She had vomited on herself and I could smell it. I could feel her nausea and that horrible hangover, drowsy vertigo. I was afraid I was going to vomit myself. She was dressed in faded ripped blue jeans and a white or cream halter top with tiny blue designs on it. Her hair was blonde, long, dirty, and stringy. Her arms were dusty. She was thin. Her hip bones protruded from the top of her jeans. Her shoulder bones protruded from her back. Her arms were hanging down at her sides like twisted paper streamers. She was wearing a faded leather belt. She was covered in bruises. Her face was covered in blemishes. It looked like she had made them bleed, maybe had picked at them. In life she would have been very pretty, at first. I could see track marks on her arms and calves. She had dark circles under her eyes. I wasn't very nice. I said in my head, "Come on, I have to pee. Why did you do that?" I've taken in so much so fast. In that 15 or 30 seconds that I stood there, holding the stall door open, I was angry at first. I knew that she had been with 2 men, getting high in a car, and had overdosed on heroin. I knew they panicked and drove out on a dark road and threw her body out of the car into the desert. I knew that the men had planned to get her high enough to make her unconscious, and they had planned to do things to her. She thought they were her friends. She showed me a random, innocuous portion of desert. It looked like a location close to our mall. I was stunned. I moved down 3 stalls to pee and told her not to follow me, and she did. She stood outside my stall, looking more 3D by then, with her hair hanging down in front of her soiled clothes and her dirty feet and chipped toenail polish sticking out of her sandals. I said, "Okay, I see you. What do you want?" She whispered, "I wanted someone to know." Then she was no longer visible. She gave me no name. Due to her attire, I had a vague sense that she died in the 70s. "All right," I said aloud. "I'm so sorry." The ladies and child were washing their hands near me. I ignored the stare of her mother. I wasn't talking to her. I finished cleaning up and went to work. As I washed my hands, combed my hair, and reapplied my lipstick, I processed details. The blonde girl didn't follow me. It has been months since I saw her. Twice I returned and told her how to cross over, telepathically. I haven't seen her, and I don't think she is ready. You see, until our conversation, she wasn't sure that she was dead. She thought she might still be tripping. She thought she was on a bad one. I have opened myself up for communication and have gone back for her a few times. I felt she was there one time, and she whispered, "No, not yet." The next time I go looking for her, I plan to take a novel and sit on a bench outside near that hallway. I will ask her to venture out, invite her to sit with me and talk while pretending to read. I will listen too. I'm not done. She asked me to see her, and I did. Telepathically communicating in a 30-stall restroom is a little unusual, but she introduced herself. Why is she there? She is stuck, reliving the last several hours of her life. I am searching records for that time period and that location. I took a walk in the fields close to the mountain where I saw her body. Nothing. It's been a long time. I do not know what I will find. Many people disappear in the Californian deserts and are never found. I believe that spirits draw energy from the emotions of people running in and out of the lavatories and from the running water. They can watch the shoppers and people watch and gather energy. I try to put up defenses in public restrooms. This is my personal experience. I am still looking for proof. I know it is too late to find a body. I plan to look at old missing person cases next. If anyone can think of a good resource for me, I would appreciate it. Back in my late teens, my cousin and I were staying at my house while our parents went out of town. First off, we were both completely sober. He was in the living room watching television, and I was in my parents' bedroom watching TV too. We can't see each other from either room and are only connected by a hallway that also is the only way to get to the bathroom and 2 other bedrooms. All of a sudden, I quickly sat up because a 2 to 3 foot wide ball of light floated from one bedroom to the hallway and into the other bedroom. I remember that it floated at least 3 to 4 feet above the floor, and it was dark black right in the middle, but surrounded by light. Right after I watched this ball of light slowly float into the room, my cousin ran into the hallway and poked his head around the corner so that I could see his scared face. Before I could say anything, he asked me, "Did you see that?" I asked him what he saw. He said he watched an old man slowly walk from one bedroom to the hallway and into the other bedroom. Right after he said this, we turned on the light of the bedroom and looked around. There was nothing in there. Afterwards, he told me that he didn't even remember seeing legs to the old man that he saw. My question: we both saw something travel from one room through the hallway and into the same bedroom, but how did each of us see different things? Old man versus ball of light. Yes, we were in different rooms without being able to see each other, but both of us agreed about the path that this thing took in the house. Also, both of us saw it at the same time. I should note that it went from my sister's bedroom to my bedroom. When I was younger, I would experience small things like doorbells going off at odd times. None of it was truly supernatural and could be explained as malfunction or something. One of these small things was a knock at my bedroom wall coming from a back room, and this could just be the house settling. It would always be late at night and would only knock once. Only once when I was about 14 I knocked back, and the knock actually responded with another knock. I knocked again twice and heard another 2 knocks. I always thought it was just the house creaking until that time. I remember turning on all the lights in the back room that shared the wall and calling whatever it was to show itself. I searched everywhere, and nothing ever came out. Poland 15 years ago. I was 14 years old, sitting at my desk doing math. I looked through the window and I saw my friend swinging on the wooden swing in her garden. She was wearing her favorite red polar jacket. It's important. I finished my homework very fast and I decided to go outside and join her. I looked through the window before I left, and she was still on the swing. When we were little, our parents made a do-it-yourself primitive gate between our gates so we didn't have to walk 3 streets to visit each other. I went through that gate, entered my friend's garden, and came closer to her. Her, at least I thought. She wasn't there. I saw 3 other people instead. One teenage guy with glasses was sitting on the swing. He was not wearing a red polar jacket. He looked like my dad's friend's nephew, but it wasn't him. There was a ladder that was used to pick up grapes, and a teenage girl was standing on the top of that ladder. She was picking up grapes and giving them to the boy on the ground. She was clearly flirting with that boy, even though he looked younger than her. She looked like my cousin, but it clearly wasn't her. She was very similar, but it couldn't be her. My cousin lived 100 kilometers away from me. The young boy didn't resemble anyone. Only the guy on the swing noticed me, but he didn't say anything. He was a bit surprised, no, more like inquisitive, but he just looked at me. Girl on the ladder and the boy she was flirting with ignored me completely. My friend wasn't there. Nobody was wearing a red jacket. I didn't stop to talk with them because I didn't know them and I had a feeling that something was not right. It wasn't fear, though. I decided to go to my friend's door and ring the doorbell. Nothing. She wasn't at home. I went back to my friend's garden and realized that the strange guests had disappeared. The swing was still swinging as if though someone had just left it in a hurry. The only way these guests could have run away was to my garden, but they weren't there. My dog didn't even bark. And they couldn't have just jumped over my incredibly high fence. And they weren't inside my greenhouse. I looked around. There were no other places to hide. Not in her garden, not in my garden. I was confused, and I told my mom what I saw. She told me to call my friend later, so I did. My friend told me she was visiting her family in a different town. She didn't have guests, and nobody was at home. I told her about those guests, and she was surprised, but very calm about it. We talked about it many times later. She always believed in paranormal things, even though she was more into science. I have no idea what I saw. I don't have epilepsy, mental problems, and I've never experienced any other glitches in my life. My mom said I looked and behaved normal when it happened. I didn't feel tired or sick, and it was a normal evening. Maybe I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe those guests wanted to have fun in my friend's garden. They switched time and reality to that moment when my friend was swinging, and I saw it through the window. They used it as a holographic disguise, but maybe I ruined their party. Maybe I could do this because they resembled the people I know, so our realities were very similar. For years I was thinking about them as ghosts, and now I think it was a glitch, or maybe I caught 3 people from another reality abusing the Matrix for fun. I don't know. I want to believe that it was just my brain. This happened about 5.5 years ago. My boyfriend was working at a marketing job over the summer. He was touring big city events all over the US, and I saw him only twice a month for 3 months. He had a partner and they were required to drive together at all times. On this particular weekend, he was driving home alone because his partner was a starving artist type and had an art show in New York City. The partner flew up, which left my boyfriend to drive the 18 hours alone. I spoke to my boyfriend at around 6 a.m. and he was going to try to make it home the same day, but it wasn't likely, and it was very illegal. I trusted him not to do anything that would put him in danger and to stop driving when he needed to sleep. But if he were able to make it home the same day, he would arrive around 10:30 p.m. I was not expecting him. That night I was laying in bed on my phone when I heard the front door open, close, feet walking into the kitchen. I looked at the clock, 11:15, and I sat up in bed and listened. I wanted to be sure it was him and not someone breaking in. I heard kitchen cabinets open and close when I called his phone. I didn't get an answer, so I laid in bed listening some more, since I also didn't hear his phone ring, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. These were his footsteps, so I laid back down and waited while staring at my phone. He was 3 steps from the top when the steps stopped. I heard one go down, then no more. I assumed he forgot something and went back down for it. After a few minutes of not hearing anything else, I became concerned. I looked out the front window and his truck was not there. I called him again with no answer. I went downstairs very confused as to what was happening, only to find all the doors were locked and nothing had been moved. I went to bed thinking my boyfriend had died. Thankfully, he didn't, and arrived the next day about 14 hours after this happened. My family is very closely tied, so one person's house is technically everyone's place, and we moved around town a lot, so whatever fits our budget and needed space is an automatic deal. My grandma can recognize actions of all of us kids and adults, and the other elders are beginning to. Many years ago, my aunt got a house in an extremely odd area of town, which is already in general as sketchy as it can get, and to this day we are not sure what the deal was. We live in a sketchy town with crimes and deaths and drugs and mentally ill people all around, if that maybe explains some of this stuff. Throughout our family, it is known as that house, though it no longer exists and a couple of years later was torn down by city order due to damage. While it was up, my family was there, and the strangest stuff had happened. There was a staircase visible from the chair my grandma sat in at night, and usually any time after midnight, she would hear creaking or faint pounding as if though someone was walking down the stairs, and there would be shadows as if someone was pacing up and down the stairs when there was no one on the stairs. The noises often woke up my older cousins and once one of my aunts. Us cousins would hang out in the kitchen or living room a lot and swear we could hear men's voices from the opposite room when no one was in the house besides Grandma. A few times the adults or oldest cousins would go downstairs to eat after work or take the dogs out early in the morning and randomly start calling out our names, telling us to go to bed when we were trying to fall asleep, and we think the phantom pounding is why. I forgot about the trash part, and my grandma reminded my cousins and me yesterday, so I'll talk about that. The kitchen was slightly L-shaped. In the bottom L near the second downstairs bathroom, there was a door to a closet where my aunt would hang our trash from the dogs, the big black hefty bags, since we had a ton of garbage every day. Right above the hook was a shelf where we had white ceramic sugar and spice pots. At the time, my second youngest cousin was terribly and very openly scared of Michael Myers and Scream and all those black-clothed, white-masked people. He'd be scared to go in the bottom L of the kitchen because, out of the corner of his eye, he'd see Michael or Scream Guy. He'd run to and from the bathroom or refuse reasons to go into that area, and even though he knew it was actually the trash and pots in there, it still made him uneasy. At first we just agreed to keep the door shut, either due to many people in and out or ghosts. It never happened. We even tried moving the ceramics to the shelf away from the hooks, shifting the bag away from the ceramics instead of having it hang down in the shape of a body, tape it up, etc. But it'd always end up looking like a body and looking like a menace, no matter what hours of the night. The cousin's fear was obvious and open, and whatever was in the house loved playing it. When adults were all busy and Grandma had somewhere to be and us kids were home alone at night, either us middle schoolers would cook us all ramen noodles after school, or one of the oldest would make sloppy joes or hamburger helper or something for dinner. So it was a lot of stuff on the stove. One time, we were making ramen and decided to try doing a giant pan with many packets, and we had to have the stove really high. We had the semi-portable TV and put it in the kitchen to watch some scary movie our cousin had rented. On screen, something went ablaze, and just coincidentally, a pot holder on our stove caught on fire right at that moment. It was too coincidental, I thought. Second oldest cousin was very experienced in cooking and pretty good at watching us. He is very responsible, but one day I guessed he just wasn't feeling it or something and was messing with us. So we put our youngest in the living room with the door gate so he could go to the bathroom and then start making supper. Many of us were just getting home late, the rest were upstairs playing a game, and we went to our rooms to do whatever, and everything was okay. All of a sudden, the youngest started screaming his head off. My brother and 2 cousins were arguing. Other cousins and sister yelled about them. Something glass from down the hall had smashed on the floor. Sister, a room away, had books fall on her floor. It could have been her accidentally knocking them down, but she said, "What are you doing?" instead of anything else, so it must have taken her by surprise. All havoc had broken loose. Then a minute later, I heard our older cousin go to get the youngest. Youngest somehow left the living room and the stove pan fell and splattered hot water and just barely missed him. But the youngest calmed down, and all of a sudden fighting stopped, the sister was okay, no yelling, and whatever broke down the hall had been picked up, like a sudden wave of chaos. Then all was well 15 seconds or so later. Once a couple of us were completely home alone after school, being watched by our older cousin and my brother. We were all out in the street playing football, and we came back in through the front to find the back door open. We were not sure on that to this day. The latch was split and the door often broke loose on breezy days, so it could have been that. Or possibly someone out of the million kids could have slipped in and out and left again through the back alley without us knowing. Before the door incident, one of my cousins was born partially blind, water to the brain and eyes, and beginning around age 4, she would sit and speak to people who were not there and address names and details of deceased relatives. In the bedroom of this house, said cousin would sit there and whisper and say full responses to random conversations. A few weeks or so after moving in, she came to my aunt and described a person she'd seen in a hallway wearing dirty clothes and holding a light, pretty detailed in her circumstances of being blind. The hallway was long. It had 3 sections. One section had a slight angle starting down the middle of it, with a few doors. We'd wake up and see things coming from the angled end. We'd see things resembling our dog, but they wouldn't respond to their names. We'd see light blurs as if there was light nearby, and shadows when all of our lights were off. We had 2 closets after that angle, and those closet doors locked, jammed almost every time we tried to open them, but there were no locks nor any objects blocking the way. Cousin's bedroom was the first door after the angle corner. Her door would get jammed a lot when she wanted to go in, and then it would slam close when it was open for a while and she wasn't in there. My dad took the door out and replaced it with a curtain. Then the curtain would get jammed on the rod and would stick when she tried sliding it. Maybe another eerie coincidence since it was a cheap rod and curtains get that way, but maybe not. Said hallway was pretty bad as well. It was all right most of the time. Afternoons or weekends we'd play catch or run through the hall or play hide and seek. Or if we had many hours to kill, we'd play this school mall race game we made up. We played Marco Polo, or we'd just take our sleeping bags and portable TV there and hang out. Once we played the school and mall game during the summer past midnight, and those are questionable experiences. They could be very explainable and probably were actually nothing, but I'll tell here just in case it was part of the haunting since it was just after midnight in both cases. I'll say again, it was a very long hallway with sections. So school was a race game where we would go get bins or baskets to be lockers, assign each other rooms or closets or our porch as classes, and we'd had to go against a timer to run through the hall, get our things, and make it to class. We'd do variations of it like best friend goals, ask out the prom date, etc. to add to the game. One time we were playing and we were all up at night, so I know this was maybe 1 or 2 a.m. We got bored and decided we'd try haunted school, where someone, my brother, would pretend to be a ghost who would wield a toy knife. Well, I was late to class in one session and was alone in the hall. I got pushed down, and I saw a real chef knife fall with me and land near me, then saw someone pick it up who had red hands and had long sleeves on. I thought maybe part of the game, to not get too scared just yet, and I ran to where I was supposed to be, and my brother was there pretending to murder my class in short sleeve with a toy knife. I never told anyone what I saw, because how do you? We stayed up later that summer. We played mall, which is a scavenger hunt where our rooms are stores. We had a variation where we'd had to take a list and do speed shopping, a scavenger race. We all had different lists. I'd get sent to my own room for things. Crap wouldn't be there where I remembered keeping it. Same with my cousin's rooms. Things all in different places. But then all normal, with objects back the next morning. Brother and sister and one cousin too were complaining that things seemed oddly harder to find. No one was comfortable sleeping in that house. It was harder to sleep without the light for half of us who were used to sleeping in just about any condition. Even my teenage brother got anxious and had night terrors with no cause at all. Brother would suddenly start growling like a lion or some crazy things. My uncle was always the lucky macho man of the family, worked with cars and tools, and was the magic man who did everything perfectly without getting hurt. But during periods of staying in this house, he would be fatigued and get hurt a lot, even slipped in the kitchen and drop plates and then get cut on them trying to get up, irrational things like that. He died from a car accident shortly after moving out. Death is easily a coincidence since the other driver was drunk, but I took note of this just in case. Our dogs would avoid the kitchen and bedrooms unless we were in there with them. My aunt's dogs wouldn't even come back into the house until everyone outside was in. They wouldn't stare up at walls or bark at anything. They'd just get super attached. They'd whine when we abandoned them and chain them up alone in the yard, and when they barked to go out, they would poop on the porch instead of out in the yard, so they'd come right back in to be with us. Before moving in, they'd have kennels and love them, but then they needed to be in our rooms at night in this house. The creepiest and largest thing that comes to mind when talking about this house would have been the thing that my younger aunt, aka the thing that seriously made everyone decide that we should get out. This story circulated around for a few years on the phone and in the household, so my younger aunt likes horror. She's not a baby. She was actually pretty chill and never freaks out. I had been up late secretly playing a game with one of my cousins, and we heard my aunt downstairs talk to herself, then drop a pan and hurry upstairs yelling for my grandma and my older aunt and my dad. With my own ears, so that is the only proof I need that something was going down. So what happened was my aunt was pulling an all-nighter and, sometime in the night and bored, went downstairs to start cooking early for the next day. She grabbed a pan for a casserole and started filling it. She heard the unmistakable sound of a kid walking and blanket dragging. She looked through the doorway into the living room, instinctively thinking her middle daughter was up, and said, "Hun, get back in bed, you're crazy." My aunt went to put the pan in the oven, looked back, and realized it wasn't my cousin, and actually a kid she's never seen before, covered in mud in a long nightgown, and Q throwing the pan and running upstairs for someone. I was wondering if anyone else has had a similar experience. I grew up in the heart of Appalachia, at the head of a holler surrounded by my mom's extended family. The land has been passed down in my family for 7 generations and has seen quite a few deaths in its time, as most family would rather spend their last few moments on earth at home. This is normal for most Appalachian clans, but what is not normal is that the women in my family can see and connect with those that have passed on. These people never really leave. I know it sounds crazy, but I vividly remember my great-grandmother who died 3 weeks after I was born. She used to take naps with me and comfort me. I can tell you her favorite color, what she was thinking when she died, in my house. Yes, I asked her, and secrets she had with my mother. There was another spirit that lived in my house, a young girl that was in my bathroom once. I screamed when I saw her, and my mom came running from the laundry room. She saw her too. After my mom threw the bleach she was carrying at her, the little girl disappeared. We think she could have been my great-great-aunt's sister that died in my driveway, but no one knows for sure. We didn't see her again after this. My cousin's 5-year-old daughter keeps asking about the little girl that lives in the driveway. That's not the only thing weird about my home. I can also tell you when someone dies. When my great-uncle passed, I knew it when I was at my home 5 houses away eating lunch. I could just feel it. This happens every time someone passes away. I feel it before I'm told about it. What I'm looking for is any kind of information on Appalachia and spirits. I swear there is something in the mountains or the land. It can't just be only me that's noticed it. I moved from Orlando, Florida to Western North Carolina with my parents back in 2002, specifically a small town named Swannanoa, just east of Asheville. We rented a 3-bedroom split-level house that had a massive backyard with a very old barn in the back. The house was situated on a large sloping hill, or mini mountain as I used to call it. I lived in this house for almost 2 years with my parents and 3-year-old brother. I was 20 to 21 at the time. From the day we moved in, my mom and I had a weird feeling about the energy of the house. It was difficult to explain the sensation I had in the house, and can best explain it as never feeling alone in the house, as if you could feel someone in any given room with you, kind of like how if someone enters a room that you are in, and you just sense their presence without having to actually see them in the room. The first paranormal occurrence I remember was when my mom was in the kitchen cooking. We had a large island in the middle of the kitchen, which my mom had just brewed and placed a large pitcher of tea on. I recall seeing the pitcher of tea sitting in the middle of the island as I walked back to my room. A few minutes later, I heard it glide across the island counter and smashed on the ground. It startled me, especially my mother. I ran into the kitchen, and she told me that as she heard the pitcher slide onto the counter, she turned just in time to watch it glide off the edge of the island counter and fly 6 or 7 feet across the kitchen and smash against the wall. While I was listening to my mom make sense of it all, my stepfather also walked upstairs. He is the world's biggest skeptic. He laughed and said to my mom, "He must have hit it against the island and sent that thing flying." Then he walked back downstairs. Both my mom and I have had separate paranormal experiences previously in our life. But even with those past experiences, we were both still rational thinkers and tried to make sense of the situation before automatically ruling a ghost or spirit made that pitcher fly across the room. A few weeks after the pitcher incident, I was sitting at my computer desk, which was near a large window at the corner of the living room. I had a friend visiting from Florida who was playing video games in my room, which was the first room down the hallway on the right side. While I was on the computer, I glanced over at the window, which was to my left. As I looked over, I noticed a couple of blinds near the top start to move, but thought nothing of it. A short time later, starting at the top of the blinds, each single blind started moving from top to bottom, as if someone took their finger and went one by one slowly down the blinds all the way to the last one at the bottom. I sat there perplexed watching this, and then got up and ran to tell my friend. He laughed at me and said it was my mind playing tricks on me. I looked for any possible reason that could have made the blinds do that. I turned the AC on and off to see if that triggered it for some reason. The AC vent was about 4 feet away from the blinds, but it didn't do anything at all. The very next night, our roles were reversed. My friend was burning a CD on the computer while I was on the phone in my room. I heard him yell my name and run into my room, and he said, "I believe you." The very same thing happened to him. I asked both my parents if they noticed anything like that with the blinds, but neither one of them had. Small odd things would continue to occur almost daily, like doors that were locked mysteriously opening, like the door in our kitchen which led to our porch that wrapped around half of the house. My parents were sticklers for locking doors, almost like they had OCD. They would check and double check to make sure the doors were always locked. The kitchen door had a very strong deadbolt and standard knob lock. We seldom ever used that door, so we would keep it locked 99.9% of the time, but that wouldn't stop it from occasionally being found open. Oftentimes you could feel that chill mountain breeze enter the house and look into the kitchen to find the door cracked or fully open. One night as I got home late from work, I parked my car on the side of the driveway. We had a driveway that veered to the right of the house and an incline just long enough for one vehicle. From that spot, you could easily see the barn sitting high up on the slope behind my house. At that time, I hadn't had a chance to explore the barn, mostly because the grass was very high in the backyard, and our landlord said he only mowed that area a few times a year. The barn was 2 floors. The first floor was made out of bricks, and the second floor and roof were made out of wood. On that night, I parked my car, got out, and looked up at the barn. I noticed what appeared to look like a lantern shining out of a large window on the second story of the barn. It then started moving out of view to the right, and a split second later it went across the opening to the left side, as if someone was pacing back and forth, but it was too dark to see anyone. One night my little brother also noticed the light after looking out of my parents' bedroom window, which faced the backyard and barn, and told my parents about it. I overheard him and rushed in there to tell my parents about it. The next day my stepdad pulled out our lawnmower and mowed a path to the barn. As we walked in, we noticed how dilapidated the barn was. It had some old rusted tools and a broken wooden ladder that led to the second floor. The second floor was completely impossible to get to. The wood up there was mostly all rotted away with only a few boards remaining. If anyone steps foot up there, they would fall right through. My stepdad told me that my brother and I must have seen someone flashing a light up there from somewhere else because it would be impossible for anyone to get up there. I saw the barn light shine almost a dozen times while living there. My brother saw it, my girlfriend saw it, and some of my friends also witnessed it one night. It was no flashlight. In February of 2003, my grandfather passed away. After the funeral in Florida, I returned to North Carolina for school and work while my parents and brothers stayed in Florida to assist my grandmother adjusting with life without her husband of 40-plus years. This is when activity at my house really picked up. One afternoon, I was playing on my drum kit in the basement. We called it the basement. It was actually the first floor of the house, combined with the garage, an open space the size of the entire house. While playing on my drums, I heard someone shout my name into my right ear. It scared me so bad that I threw my drumsticks straight into the air. I looked around, and there was absolutely no one in there with me. At the time, we had 2 beagles. They were both downstairs with me when this happened. I looked over to them, and they were standing side by side, whimpering a bit, and staring at the wall right in front of me. That spooked me quite a bit. I grabbed my pack of smokes and walked outside for a cigarette, trying to comprehend what I had heard. That night I was terrified to sleep in my house by myself. I created a ritual that night that I would follow the next few weeks until my parents returned home. Before bed, I would turn the bathroom light on. The bathroom was directly across the hall from my bedroom. I would then lock my bedroom door, turn the sleep timer on my TV for hours past the point I knew it would take me to fall asleep. I just didn't want to fall asleep to a silent house. On one night, as I went through my ritual, about an hour after watching TV, I heard a thump and a roll of a ball across my dresser. I had a signed baseball from the 2000 MLB All-Star game that sat on a pedestal it came with. The baseball had fell off the pedestal, hit the dresser, and rolled down it on the floor. As soon as I went to pick it up, my TV shut off, hours before the timer was set to go off. Both adrenaline and fear kicked in as I tried to find my TV controller in the dark room. I couldn't find it, so I made my way to the TV, and right before I could reach for it, the TV turned back on, and the stereo in my room also turned on full blast at the very same time. I felt so vulnerable and petrified, but that was nothing compared to what happened a few nights later. We had a blizzard come through around this time, so there was plenty of snow on the ground. One night I was sitting on my couch watching television waiting for my friend to come over for a jam session. As I was watching TV, I started hearing shuffling coming from the base of the stairs that led from the basement to the upstairs hallway. A few minutes later, I heard what appeared to be someone run up my stairs, so I jumped up and hid around the corner wall, waiting to see an intruder or robber bust open the door, but nothing happened. After about a minute of waiting, I quietly walked into my room and grabbed my baseball bat. I then walked to the door leading to the basement, opened it really quick while getting ready to swing. There was no one there. My dogs again started whimpering. I turned on the basement lights and walked halfway down the stairs where I could view the entire basement and didn't see anyone at all. I went back upstairs, made sure the door was locked, and continued watching television. I couldn't figure out what I had heard. It was too loud to be my 2 small dogs. A short while later, I heard the same sound, only much louder, as if someone had work boots with weights attached and was running up my stairs. At this point, I was completely convinced that someone had broken into my house. I ran right to the door just as the sound ended, unlocked and opened the door, and swung my bat blindly at nothing. I dropped the bat so quick, slammed the door shut, grabbed my cigarettes, and walked outside to my porch that was covered in snow, wearing a tank top and shorts. I must have smoked 15 cigarettes on that porch waiting for my friend to get there. Once he arrived, he looked at me like I was crazy. I told him what happened, and we went inside to investigate. We both took turns running up the stairs, but couldn't mimic the loudness of the steps that I had heard. I was completely freaked out at this point. My friend believed me and actually told me some things that he kept to himself that happened to him on different occasions when he stayed over at my house. When he would stay over, he would sleep in my brother's room. He told me one night while sleeping in that room that his covers were slightly pulled, and a different night the closet door opened slowly and closed abruptly. This struck a chord, as my little brother would also say that his closet would move by itself, but my parents would brush it off as his imagination. A couple days later, I would find myself opting to camp out in my GMC Jimmy rather than entering my own home. I pulled up to my house one night after playing pool at around 2 to 3 a.m. As I went to walk up the stairs leading to my porch, I glanced up at my bedroom window and noticed the blinds pulled apart a few inches and what appeared to be a very dark figure in the opening. I froze, and then watched the blinds slowly come back together, as if someone or something was looking at me through my own bedroom window. I will never forget that sight. I'm literally having goosebumps typing this out. I turned around, got in my car, and drove behind a hotel off of I-40 near my house and slept in the car that night. I didn't care that it was in the 30s that night. I just didn't want to be anywhere near the house. The next few days leading up to my parents returning, I stayed with some friends and my girlfriend those nights, only returning to my house a couple of times in the day to feed and walk my dogs. I shared all of my stories with my mom. She was very receptive and also shared some strange things that happened to her and my brother in the house. A few months later, my parents moved back to Florida full-time to be closer to my grandma. I stayed in North Carolina but moved in with my uncle in a different town. There are so many more occurrences that I could share during my time living in that house, but those certainly were the highlights, which will live with me forever. In Sussex County, Delaware, there is a road, 13 curves. This is near the Brockkill River and Slaughter Beach. Yeah, I know. Great names, right? They were named that for a reason. Rumor has it the road has 13 curves because it goes around Indian burial grounds and is said to be haunted. These are nearly 90-degree curves. People around here tend to stay off it after dark. I believe it was either the Nanticoke Indian or Sequoia Indian tribes that inhabited that area. They were both here at one point, but the Nanticokes are still here. On the way home from Philly on the 13th of September 2017, my daughter and her friend wanted to go down the road on the way home. They thought it would be fun, 13 curves on the 13th. Of course, I said okay. It was around 7:30 to 8 p.m. when we arrived. That's when it all started. I've been down that road before, so I know how to get to it. It took me 5 to 10 minutes to find it. I thought, that is odd. When we found it, it got ice cold to the point I had to put the heat on. Okay, no big deal. Coming up on the first curve, I look in the mirror and I think, where did that car come from? There has not been a driveway or a street for about 3/4 of a mile or so, but he's driving extremely fast. Look back at the road, back at the mirror, and the distance was cut in half between us. Sort of like the Ninja Cat video. You know, the one of the person's recording the cat, hides behind the wall, looks back and the cat's closer? Same thing. This person is going to crash, I said to my daughter. Again, look back at the road, back in my mirror, and the headlights were at my bumper. How fast does this guy want me to go? Again, looking at the road back in the mirror. Wait, where did he go? If he turned off, surely we would have seen headlights somewhere. It was pitch black. No streetlights anywhere on this road. On the right were cornfields, on the left, trees and a salt marsh. Crap, I thought he crashed. Turned around with nothing to show where he went. Okay, it's time to go. Just then, 3 mists traveled in opposite direction in front of the car. 2 to the right, and 1 to the left on the opposite. Okay, it's time to get out of here now. But I couldn't see out of the windshield. It wouldn't clear with the wipers and fluid. The more I used the wipers, the worse it got. Okay, now we're all freaking out. We finally get out of that, and it took us 15 minutes to get out of the area. No matter which way we went, we ended up back at 13 curves. Now mind you, I don't ever get lost. So my daughter pulls out her GPS. The GPS kept taking us back to 13 curves. Okay, now it's getting a little too freaky, I thought. I finally find an area I knew and started driving back to the highway, or so I thought. Guess where we ended up back at? Yup, 13 curves. Once again, back to the GPS. We get on the road out to the highway and it says we're going back to 13 curves. Something said just keep going straight. Thank God, the highway. And oh my God, the GPS is now accurate. It shows where we are and how to get home. Now it's hot and the heat gets turned off and windows go back down. A nice 65 to 70 degrees. Back on the highway, my daughter's friend asks her, "Did you see those people?" And my daughter finished with, "Standing on the rock watching us go by?" Yeah. They both freaked out, and I didn't see anyone. That was my second and last trip down that road. The whole ordeal took about 30 minutes for something that should have taken 5. Now I know and understand why people stay off it at night. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed these stories, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon, where for $1 or more a month you'll have early access to all MP3 narrations on this channel 24 hours before they're posted on YouTube. And be sure to check out shop.spreadshirt.com/letsread for a super cool Let's Read avatar t-shirt just for you. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you again soon.